For over a century, our textbooks, pretty much everything tells us that Mesopotamia, or the Fertile Crescent, up where Syria and Iraq and through that area, that is the cradle of civilization. And I'll make the case in this video that it is a cradle, but it is not the cradle. So when you look through the science, through the genetics, through the linguistics, through the archaeology, all those things, you put them all together, the deepest roots are not in Mesopotamia. They are actually in Africa. I just did a video maybe a month ago on the Tower of Babel and it being somewhere in the south of Egypt along the Nile in that area. And this video is going to be basically a part 2 to that, deeper and part 2 of that, and I think you'll really enjoy it. Because Africa, I'll show you a map here, but Africa, of course you know what it looks like, but Africa contains something that actually no other region on Earth, as we call it, or on this flat plane. So Africa, as I said, it contains something far older, some more, in really way more unique than anywhere else in the world. And it's something that Mesopotamia, or the Fertile Crescent, doesn't have it. And Asia doesn't have it, and Europe doesn't have it, and the Americas don't have it. That is that it has 5 language groups, or language families. They're called proto-languages, but 5 language families that do not come from a common ancestor. There's thousands of languages in Africa, of course, but there are 5 language groups. Most will say 4, but we're going to go with 5 because I'll bring that in a second. 5 language groups in Africa, and they do not overlap at all. 5 language groups that do not come from what can be considered a common ancestor. So the linguists cannot trace these 5 languages back to a common ancestor in Africa, even though they are all African families. So these are what they call linguistic phyla, and they formed in basically separate worlds, completely separate, even though they came from the same continent and have stayed in the same continent with little issues here and there, but basically they're still there, these 5 proto-languages. So 5 tongues, think of Babel, of course, 5 tongues that remain distinct for over 5,000 years in Africa. You can't say that about Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia does not have 5 or 4 or 3. It has its group that is there, as China has its group, as Europe has its group, as Americas have their group. But Africa is unique in this, that it has 5 groups that are distinct, not just in DNA, but also in language. Of course, cultures and that type of thing, of course, come from there. But what does it tell us about the Tower of Babel? We have the Niger-Congo group, which I, in my videos, have made to believe that that is the land of Shem, and other African presenters have also made the case that that Hebrews are Negroes and that kind of thing. And I have no problem with that Shem makes up the Niger-Congo group, a huge group. And I've already done a few videos on that. The Afro-Asiatic group, which is the Northern Africa, Egypt, into, the almost all the way over to Spain, across North Africa, and down in Somalia in that area. And then the Nilo-Saharan group, which is more in the Sudan, down towards Kenya, that area. And then the Khoisan, which is found a very small group found in South Africa area. And then we're going to talk also about the pygmy groups that live in the forested areas in the center part of Africa as well. So these are what they consider DNA lines. They're 5 or groups or holders or whatever you want to call them. But they did not merge in Africa even after 5,000 plus years. They did not blend. They did not collapse into one another. They're still there, defined, very well defined, and they lived side by side, and that's the fascinating thing. But still remain distinct within their areas. So it's a perfect biological mirror of a Babel or Tower of Babel style of fracture. A fracture. Something happened, I believe, at the Tower of Babel, and it caused, of course, the language to split. But what else did split? Because like I said with Mesopotamia and what we call the Cradle of Civilization, which isn't true, but it is a cradle, but not the cradle. That would be found in Africa. But in that area, they don't have this 5 language groups, 5 DNA groups and all that. No, it's much more constant, one group and then broken off from there. But here we have 5 separate groups. So I put a map here just showing some of how the movement might have been made from East Africa, in my opinion, out to all those areas. Because like I said in my last video, I see the Tower of Babel somewhere up in the Shinar area. There's still a Shinar there today, or Shinar, and that it was somewhere between the White and the Blue Nile, somewhere up in that area. And so I find that fascinating that we have these 5 groups. The Khoisan have given some of their language traits a bit to the Xhosa of the Bantu people, and the Bantu people's languages from the Proto-Congo area, the Proto-Niger-Congo area, they have infiltrated into the Pygmy languages, which were once their own proto-group. But if we look at the Pygmy people of Africa, they are their own genetic DNA group. And the Khoisan people are their own DNA group, completely separate from everybody else. Each of these are completely separate. The E1B1A and the E1B1B, they're completely separate as well. Even when we call them those 2 groups, I think if you look into it, you'll find they still have no common ancestor. So they cannot, for all these 5 groups and the Nilo-Saharan group, for all these 5 groups in Africa, they cannot track a common ancestor, meaning they cannot find common words or common ways of speaking or common anything. They would link one group to the next. So within one continent, we have 5 groups, 5 unique groups. And try to explain that. Even the science, as I've researched this, the science cannot figure out, they cannot see how this can happen within Africa. Now, of course, they don't believe in the Tower of Babel and that type of thing, but they cannot explain how within that situation of one continent, we can have these 5 ancient languages. The Khoisan especially and the Pygmy are ancient languages. In my opinion, personally, I think they may have even left the Tower of Babel area even before the Tower of Babel. They may have gone down into South Africa or into the rainforests like the Pygmy people long before the Tower of Babel, which was hundreds of years after the flood. But who knows? But they do know that the Khoisan is the most ancient and the Pygmy in that same group, and the others not so much. And that would make sense if they did leave before the Tower of Babel. So this is we're just talking about the African dispersal. I'm going to do another video on everything else, but this is about the African dispersal. 5 ancient branches, all separate, all unique, whether it's in DNA or it's in linguistics, completely separate, that form the whole continent's linguistic and genetic map. To me, is fascinating. I want to mention here too that as I've studied this, and it turns out that by the linguists and also by the genetics, that Africa is the land, the cradle of civilization. It is the most ancient of all the places, and that includes Sumer, China, and all the other areas, Europe. The oldest is in Africa. And I'll put up this quote by Diop, the archaeologist, or Egyptologist, I guess you call it. And he said the same thing. He said that the people left, for all the world, the people came out of Africa, out of the Tower of Babel, I suppose. And that is basically what the science, they will never say it's the Tower of Babel, but they do admit that all came out of Africa, that it's all from Africa. And they actually place it fairly close to Egypt, to the south of Egypt, in that area. They're not going to say it's the Tower of Babel, but they can see where the languages spread from. So in terms of if you're an African or you have those ancestors and you're living in the States or wherever in the world, if you have these DNA markers, then your fit is into Africa, right? One is, as I said, the E1B1A, the Shem, which I call the Niger-Congo, or I call Shemite groups. The E1B1B, which is to me the Cushite groups, outside of Canaan, in my opinion. The AB group, which I take as to be Canaan. I'm not certain how, because Canaan, of course, was from the brothers, but maybe something that happened with Canaan caused a difference there, but there's no proof, and that would be just speculation. The AOA1 is the Khoisan, and I believe, as I said, that they were the first scattered people. And the B2 are the Pygmy people, and as I said, they have a lost proto-language, I believe, and that's what the linguists say as well. So these are nothing to do with stereotypes. They're not judgments on any one people, the great people. And I'm going to do a video just on Canaan shortly, because the Canaanites were the most linked people with the Israelites of all peoples by far. We read of King David, even when he conquered the Jebusites and took over Jerusalem. We see that the Jebusites mixed in and lived with among the Israelites. We see the Canaanites influence all through the Bible. Maybe Cushites the next after the Canaanites. The Canaanite peoples were not just one people. As I said, there were many different peoples under different names, but they mixed in very much so, all the time with the people of the 12 tribes. The mixed multitude, I guess I like to call it, but they did mix in. They weren't asked to, they tried not to, they had all those things, but yes, there was lots of mixing in. So there's nothing about one group being superior to another at all. They're all ancient. And really, if you wanted to go look at the most ancient that we can show, it's the Khoisan and the Pygmy. Okay. And then, of course, like I said, the other groups separated at some point, which I think would be the Tower of Babel. In the next video, I want to discuss again and more so about the whole area south of Egypt, of Meroe and Shinar and Bab el-Mandeb and those kind of things. But these areas have ancient peoples, even the Ethiopian people, which really were never conquered by the Romans, which is why we have the scriptures coming from there now, the hidden scriptures that were lost in the Ethiopian Bible and that type of thing. But it's a region, an area of Africa that is ancient, and I believe probably is the ancient where the Tower of Babel stood and the first city-state was, which would have been in Africa. And that is actually what the findings show. We'll show that in another video, but that the findings show that Africa was the first. And then slightly after that, we have Egypt and Sumer and that type of area. But these are ancient things. And it's interesting, you can trace it by archaeology, you can trace it by linguistics, and you can trace it by DNA. And they all come to the same thing, that Africa is the center or the base or the start of civilization, not the area where Sumer is. Yes, it was a fertile crescent. Yes, it was a cradle of civilization, just as China is a cradle of civilization, just as parts of Europe are cradles of civilization. But the true cradle, the beginning, was in Africa. I want to show just quickly, for those that aren't so comfortable with maps and stuff, so the E1B1A and the Proto-Niger-Congo language groups are spread across West, Central, and Southern Africa. And I'll put a map here, and it shows the Bantu peoples expanding, and it shows where the Ibu and the Yoruba and that type of people are, okay? The North and the East of Africa, which I consider to be Push, Mizoram, the Put area, that type of thing. And so that's the E1B1B. And that's also considered the Afro-Asiatic area for languages. So the Horn of Africa, North Africa, and even into Arabia, as I mentioned. The AB Nilotic, which is the interior Nile, so the headwaters of the Nile, which I believe is actually where the 12 tribes actually were before they were kicked out and lost the lost 10 tribes, and then Judah being removed by the Romans. But this is areas called the AB Nilotic and Nilo-Saharan. This is South Sudan, Chad, and Kenya, that area. The deep south of Africa, we're almost talking all the way to Cape Town, like very far south. The Khoisan people, and as I said, the first scattered people, they have an AO/A1 grouping for genetics, for DNA, and their language Khoisan, and as I said, it merged in a bit with the Xhosa people. This is the Kalahari, Namibia, and Botswana area. And then we have the rainforest interior. So this is like in the Congo Basin. So the Pygmy group, and as I said, the lost proto group. They did have a language, but it's been somewhat lost. So they do speak, as I mentioned, the Proto-Congo language groups from the people around them. But this would be in the Congo Basin. So if Babel caused a sudden break in language, which I believe, that's what I believe, in the language, we should find a region in the world where languages split from sharply and stayed separate for thousands of years. That's why this part of Africa is so crucial to understanding Babel and the Tower of Babel. If it is true, I believe it is, but it gives us at least something to think about. So Mesopotamia, as I said, does not show this pattern at all. It's one group. Europe, one group. Yes, many branches, same as Mesopotamia, many branches, but not 5 distinct groups, not even 3 distinct groups. And Asia does not have this pattern either. Again, a branching out. But Africa does, which is fascinating. And we could even thank the Khoisan people and the Pygmies, because they actually show how old Africa is, and they can show us what might have been and what might have happened. So Africa is the only, and I say only, continent with 5 unrelated language families and 5 unrelated DNA lines. It has the deepest human diversity on Earth. And that is, for me, the perfect fingerprint for where it was the Tower of Babel. I'm not going to get into speculation. You can consider it, of course, but there is no common ancestor for the DNA and no common ancestor for the languages. And yet they are all within Africa, these groups. And then you have to go, okay, if there was no, so what happened to cause that there was no common ancestor? Well, maybe the Tower of Babel. And maybe the Tower of Babel, I'll put this out there, this is speculation only, but maybe the Tower of Babel affected more than just our, our mouths. Maybe it really affected the human being in a deep way that caused this separation of the peoples in the days of Eber, as it says in Jubilees, the people scattered in the days of Eber, not the whole world. They went into the whole world at the time of Eber. So we think about that and think about what could have happened there. Maybe the languages were changed because something else changed within the human nature. Because we can also look at the age of people from Adam down through Noah, then it starts to shorten a bit. But where does the really shortening come? Right at the time of the Tower of Babel. It just goes boom, boom, boom until very quickly we have Abraham's time, where it's down to 120 years. And I find that fascinating too. So what happened at the Tower of Babel, we don't know. But we do know from the Bible that it was Heavenly Father, or our Father in heaven, or Abba, whatever you want to call him, because people don't like the word God, and I don't like some of the other words that people use. But let's just say Abba, or Father, changed things, and he scattered the people so they could not grow together easily again, until now in our days, where everything is pushing us back into a Babel type of society, to a one world group. And that be that as it may. Whether it'll happen or not, I don't think so. But this breaking at Babel is so fascinating. And so think about where you might fit into this grand scheme of things. And even if you're in Philippines, or like me from Canada, or from the Britain, or from other parts of Europe, or from, like I said, Russia, China, the islands near Australia, no matter where we're from, there is a genetic pool that we come from. We all do. And this isn't to say that one genetic pool is bigger or better than another. I want to add here at the very end, remember that Israel, the 12 tribes, they came from Shem. They are not Shem. They came from Shem. They are of Shem, yes, I believe that, mixed in with other groups like Ham and also Canaan. But the lineage is of Shem. No doubt about it. I don't have any problem with that. What I have a issue with is when people start to think that, oh, all of Shem now, all the Bantu, all the Ibu, all the Yoruba, every person in all of the whole E1B1A and all the Proto-Niger Congo people, they're all the 12 tribes. And I'm going like, that isn't biblical, for one thing. And the Bible doesn't make them out to be a people of 1.5 billion plus people. No, they're always a small people. They were a small people. And I don't mean in height, but they were never a huge people. In my opinion, even in Africa, they were never a huge people. I did the video on Aristeas going in 250 years before Jesus into Jerusalem. And at that time, it was not, that whole kingdom of Judea was about the size of not even half of Kenya. So it was not a huge area at that time. Now, when the 10 tribes were there, was it larger? Probably a little larger. But it was never this huge land. So if we think that every Shemite, every person that's a Bantu or Yoruba or Igbo, everyone is perfectly in one of the 12 tribes, I'm thinking, well, how does that work? Where did all the relations of Shem go? Shem lived in Africa and expanded into all these languages and groups and all this modification. From the flood all the way down to Abraham is almost 1,000 years. And from Abraham to Moses, another 300, 400 years. So we're talking 1,300, 1,400 years. Shem was spreading out, as were all the other peoples, the Neolithic people and the Afro-Asiatic peoples, and of course the Khoisan and the small pygmies. But these peoples were spreading out. Africa was already populated, completely populated, by the time Moses came down with Joshua to take the land from the Canaanites. It was already populated. There were already Bantu living everywhere. There were already Ibu and there were already Yoruba living everywhere. Now, does that mean that none of the 12 tribes mixed in with those peoples? Absolutely not. I believe they did, of course, as they were supposed to mix in with peoples all over the world. But just have us try to take those blinders off and try to say, okay, we know the Bantu expansion was at least from 2000 BC. Well, Moses and Joshua didn't come into the land until about 1300 BC. So that's 700 years right there in difference. And I think the Bantu expansion started in the Tower of Babel in about 3000, 3100 BC, somewhere in there, or 2800, 2900, in that range, that they then went to West Africa and then expanded from there. But however we sort it all through, just remember to have grace for your own fathers. If you are Bantu or Yoruba or Igbo, if your family is from any of the brothers that came from Shem's lineage, other than the one that Abraham came from, or any of that, you follow down those chains just by using just computer logic that each family had 4 or 5 kids. By the time we reach Abraham, there's already millions of people just among the Shemites living in Africa. So be gracious, I hope, to your own parents. They're not my parent. I don't come from Africa. I don't have the DNA profile. But my parents are my parents. My family are my family, for good or for bad. They are my family. And I think for the people that are in Africa, look to your fathers. Look, I did videos on the languages. Look to your own lineages, your own family, and don't try to have to plug yourself into the 12 tribes of Israel, who were scattered. And most, I believe, were taken out of the continent. Some did not, of course. Many did not. But the great majority, we have no idea where the lost tribes went. That's 10 of them. And then Judah was taken away by Rome. And I mean, we know they were in Iberia and Spain and that area. So we know that they were scattered. We know they went into the Americas and everywhere. So just remember that these things that we're talking about are not to make one group better than another. Not to say I am now part of this elect group. Because of that, I am better than everyone else. Because we know if we look at Jesus and his life, how he handled that issue with the Pharisees at his time, or the people of Nazareth. He said to the people of Nazareth, yeah, but what about those couple Gentiles that were blessed when your fathers were not? You know, Heavenly Father will bless us according to our righteousness and according to our actions. Yes, he has a specific job for, or covenant for, the 12 tribes. Absolutely. And I joy in that. And whether I am or not doesn't matter. I still joy in it. But does that mean that we all have to be of the 12 tribes? No, we don't. Strangers are welcome in if they will follow the covenant and follow the same things that the Israelites themselves would not follow most of the time. The reason they were dispersed all over the place is because they would not do the covenant any more than Canaan would keep the covenant about the land. The Israelites would not keep the covenant that they were given at the mount with Moses. They refused to keep it. Some did, sure. Even when Elijah was fighting the prophets of Baal, even then, he said, he complained when he's out in the cave, and God, or the Father, said, yeah, there's still a few thousand out there. He didn't say, oh, they're all righteous out there. He said, no, there's still a few thousand out there. So we are human. We all are all human. And we all have the opportunity to follow the commandments, to follow the Sermon on the Mount, to follow the things that Jesus, or Jesus, or Jesus, or whatever name you want to give him. And I know in Africa there's other names. But he taught us a way. And if we want to walk in that way, we can join with the people of the covenant. And if the people of the covenant don't want to walk in the way, they will be out the door with everyone else. That is what the parable of the supper is. The ones that were invited would not come. So then he sent out for others from other nations, other groups, other places to come in and fill the supper. I think it's an open for anyone that wants to live the way of the Father, and it's especially open for the dry bones to rise and remember who they are and come back in. And for me and for others and all of us, the people of Shem in Africa, to help the dry bones to come back to the knowledge of their fathers, which they lost. And I really appreciate those that put a comment, and especially if you can give it a like. It really helps with the videos and helps for me and my channel. And if you feel to join the channel down below, please do. I appreciate any support I can get. And I really enjoy doing these videos, and they do take time, but I really love doing them. And anyway, thanks for watching. Here's a video that I just did, and I'll put up over here the next one in this series as soon as I have it ready. And thanks for watching today, and thanks, and have yourselves a good day. Take care. Bye-bye.